So we entered Elul, the Hebrew month of Elul, last Shabbat, last Saturday. For some of us here at the congregation, for others of us up at Camp Stein, where we shared in the bar mitzvah of our camp director, Leah Zigman. And it was beautiful up at camp, and it's beautiful to, of course, be here in the air-conditioned room because it's getting to me. I'm sure it's getting to you too, just getting from the house to the car and driving. And I have an older car, so the air conditioning is not working so well, and you know that's not good for me. And if it's not good for me, I'm unhappy. That has nothing to do with what I wanted to share with you tonight. Although I did, after we were done with a beautiful Shabbat at camp and beginning of Elul, ventured to the home base, to Northern California, this time with child number 2, Gabrielle Maya. So Gabrielle graduated high school and will be going to Western Washington University in what is now the longest summer of anyone's life because they're on the quarter system. They don't start school till September 22nd. And the poor thing is just going stir crazy. And I have a tradition, and in Judaism, a tradition means you do it once, and it's a tradition. So after Ethan graduated high school, he got to go on a trip, and I took him and a couple of friends away, and Gabrielle has no friends that are home. They're all off at college, so it was just the two of us. We drove from SFO up to Point Reyes. Now, I was born and raised in San Francisco, so I spent 18 years there. I went to UC Santa Cruz, so I was there another 4 years. I also worked in San Francisco for 4 years. I'd never been to Point Reyes before. It is famous, of course, for oysters and for cheese. There are many, many dairies, including a kosher, Jewish kosher dairy outside of Point Reyes. And I rented a house, and Gabrielle and I stayed in this house. And as I was going to my car to get something, I heard, "Rabbi Kahn." And it was Lawrence Harris. And I don't know if you remember Lawrence Harris. Ruth was his wife, who was the cantor at Temple High for a few years. And, you know, like out of nowhere, there they are in the house right next door. And she had done the wedding at the kosher dairy on Saturday night. And so it's a small world. Also has nothing to do with what I want to talk about. But being a rabbi, warming up for the high holidays, got to get it all out. So this week's Parsha is called Shoftim. And Shoftim is one of my favorite Torah portions, of course, but also is the Torah portion with its most famous line, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And the word for justice in Hebrew is tzedek. Often we translate tzedek or tzedakah as charity, but Hebrew is a limited language. So on the one hand, there are lots of words for example, in Hebrew, lots of words for love. Not just ahava, rachamim, chanun, many words for love, but different variations. And actually, tzedek, which is righteousness, charity, justice, is also a synonymous word for love. So when you say in Judaism, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, it's not just love in the abstract, but it's also love in being just to your neighbor, as you would want someone to be just to you, or kind to your neighbor. You know, the King James Bible was the first time that this idea of loving kindness as a translation for rachamim came up. It's love in the form of kindness. So if you want to be treated kindly, treat your neighbor kindly. So ahava's got lots of translations in English. We call it loving kindness as one of them. But this idea of justice is so central in Judaism that it occurred to me that we don't really think about it in terms of its centrality not only to Judaism, but to this month of Elul. Now, why do I bring this up? So Gabrielle and I had, I would say, at least a half a dozen, hour-and-a-half to 2-hour conversations. Here's what I learned about being an 18-year-old, 18-and-a-half-year-old, and her friend group, and what she believes most fundamentally. She's not just concerned about the environment. Right? She doesn't just think about, oh, the environment is in trouble. Right? I think lots of us think about the environment. Lots of us think about what is going on, what is out of whack in our world. We just, on one hand, see these hurricanes developing and getting bigger and bigger, but our intellectual minds also know that 24-hour-a-day news cycles and blogs and Facebook doesn't help. You're literally every second looking at the hurricane move. And when I grew up, it was maybe once a day, once in the newspaper, once on the news that you saw a hurricane develop, and now we're seeing it, big buildup. But intellectually, we also know that they're getting worse and they're getting stronger. So she cares a lot about the environment. She's very passionate. Every time when we went to the grocery store, I wasn't allowed to get a bag. We carried our vegetables and fruit to the house. I mean, the first time we got bags because there was a lot of it, but the subsequent visits, she made me think about what it means to use a grocery bag, and that for the 4 peaches and 3 nectarines and thing of milk, that we didn't really need a bag, right? So she's passionate about the environment. She's passionate about justice in the world on all kinds of levels. 1.5, 2-hour conversations about tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. She didn't call it that. And what justice ultimately means. And what she taught me is how to do justice by not getting that grocery bag. That's a small example. She's worried about justice of people her age in the job market and in the world. She's passionate about LGBT rights and the injustices in the world against people who have different ways of seeing themselves. And so these 1.5-hour conversations was me being her dad and sort of trying to bother her and disrupt, because I'm trying to teach my daughter at 18. There are other people who have different ideas than you do, and you have to listen to what those ideas are. That's part of justice as well. But I really was so impressed with what she had to say about the environment and about LGBT rights and about war. But the punchline was really toward the end of the trip when she, as we were driving to the airport, said, "Do you ever think that maybe you shouldn't have had kids?" Now, I'm sure some of you have had teenagers who have said this. And she didn't say it sarcastically. And she wasn't talking about overpopulation. She really wanted to know, do you ever regret having kids? Yeah, Dad, I know, everyone's created in the image of God, and you're Jewish, and you think that you should have kids, but do you ever think that maybe you shouldn't have had kids, shouldn't have brought people into the world to experience all of this war and carnage and environmental disaster? And she had a very good point. I mean, it's not exactly the question I expected to hear from her, but it was sort of her wrap-up question. And it got me thinking, why have kids? Why bring people into a world that can be disruptive and disappointing? It's because we believe in the pursuit of justice as an act of love, as an act of righteousness. So then I got back from my trip, and I ran from the airport home, and I got changed, and I taught confirmation last night. So I got my 18-year-old for 5 days, passionate about justice, really challenging me. I was challenging her. And then I've got a bunch of confirmands, 10th graders last night, and we're talking about, I always start the year with death, dying, and the afterlife, the Jewish view, which there's a class in November, P.S., that you can sign up for. Well, you don't have to sign up, you can just show up. And we were talking about the idea in Judaism of this world and the world to come, and what it is that enables one's soul to make a transition, if you will, from this world to the world to come. And these kids were also, in their questions and in their, just in 45 minutes, how they engaged in the conversation, very curious about ideas of justice and love. How your afterlife or the world to come is really a reflection, if not an extension, for your soul of this world. That if you live a just life, this is what the kids were talking about, if you live a just life and a life of peace and a life where you pursue fairness for all people, that in a way predicts what the world to come will be like. In other words, your world to come, your heaven, will just be an extension of your experience on earth. What was, again, what you loved in the other, what you did for the other comes back tenfold, 100-fold in the world to come. So I want us to think about justice differently. And I want us to hear, as I bring this to a conclusion, not just the words of my daughter, which were very haunting in some ways, but again, very challenging, and who doesn't like to have hour-and-a-half, 2-hour conversations with their kid? Like, that's cool, let alone 4 or 5 times in the course of a week when she wasn't also telling me that I was driving terribly and that the music that I listened to was terrible. I mean, don't think that this was like idealistic. There were also many times when I was told just how little I know about everything. But I wanted to share from Sfat Emet, from Rabbi Yehuda Leibalter of Ger, from the Hasidic tradition, their view of justice, because it really made me think about it as I was thinking about this week, and I was thinking about our kids. At least our kids have an idea of justice that I think a lot of adults sometimes fail to embrace, because it is really selfless to seek justice and pursue justice. So on the line, tzedek, tzedek tirdov, justice, justice shall you pursue, the rabbis teach, there is no final depth or end to justice and truth. And their correlation is that justice, yes, it means love, it's synonymous with love, but for them, justice is synonymous with truth-telling. Being truthful is being just. So there's no final depth or end to justice and truth. We always have to go deeper, seeking out truth within truth. And think about that for a second, seeking truth within truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable. It is not true until the person is entirely unified and prepared for God's service. Thus, emet, truth, contains the first, middle, and last of the Hebrew letters. It's a whole word, aleph, mem, taf. It contains all of the letters, the first, middle, and last. One rabbi named Rabbi Yehudi taught that the word justice is repeated, tzedek, tzedek, to say that even in the pursuit of justice, you have to engage justly without lying. So in this Shabbat, I want us to think about justice not only as a passion of my 18-year-old daughter, who made me go grocery shopping and take food without a bag home, but really thinking about, and I made the argument that all of you would make, P.S., which is, really, this one paper bag is going to make the difference? Yeah. In the eyes of an 18-year-old and many of us, it does make a difference. It does make a difference. It's one less bag being used, one less item being discarded, one less piece of food being wasted because, as I had learned, I order too much at restaurants to go. Look at all this wasteful food. I felt like it was my mom again. Look at all the food you wasted. Like, that's justice. And then to go deeper and look for the justice within the justice and think about truth as justice. We have a lot to think about this, Elul. And so from the mind of an 18-year-old to the mind of our confirmands to what I'm just trying to relay tonight, which I'm trying to really put together to the words of the rabbis, let's end this thought with this idea that the vision of justice and the repetition of justice in Shoftim is ultimately to teach us how to engage justly, how to not just think about justice, but how to do justice in all ways and in all times, and to do so not just legitimately, but with the idea that to do justice is to be a truth teller, and sometimes the truth hurts, but nonetheless it's important. And I'm grateful that this week I was told truths that I hadn't thought of before from some kids. I hope you all get to experience that blessing in one way or another, to listen to the voice of our kids and maybe be a little bit jarred, but at the same time understand that truth and justice do prevail, do connect us to each other, make the world better, and bring God into our presence. Shabbat Shalom. I'm so glad that Allison Kierman, a member of our board of directors, is here with us tonight to share some announcements.